Welcome, everyone. My name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 3, with my co-host today, Derren Burrell. Hello, Derren.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Jesan. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be a part of the great work that you're doing here, and excited to see how you use authors and leaders of the past to really influence the leaders of today and obviously tomorrow.
Obviously, yeah. Well, and Darren, I wanted to invite you onto the podcast. Hope to have you on for multiple episodes. I think that your insights from your past and from your past experience are going to be very helpful here. Let me jump into the book. Then the king of men, Agamemnon, answered him, "Flee then, if your heart urges you. I do not beg you to remain for my sake. With me are others who will honor me, and above all Zeus, the Lord of counsel. Most hateful to me are you, of all the kings that Zeus nurtures, for always strife is dear to you, and wars and battles. If you are very strong, it was a god, I think, who gave you this gift. Go home with your ships and your companions, and lord it over the Myrmidons. For you I care not, nor take heed of your wrath. But I will threaten you thus. As Phoebus Apollo takes from me the daughter of Chrysis, her with my ship and my companions I will send back, but I will myself come to your tent, and take the fair-cheeked Briseis, your prize, so that you will understand how much mightier I am than you, and another may shrink from declaring himself my equal, and likening himself to me, to my face." That was a speech from the great Greek king Agamemnon, from the opening of a truly ancient epic, the Iliad. This is a long poem. Most people don't realize how long it actually is. And scholars dated back to, the earliest extant that they dated back to is around 630 BC. And yes, that's before Christ, kids. That's the terminology we use here. But the version that we have has been around, since anywhere between 675 to around 725 BC. It has been read, reread, examined, dissected, written about, opined about. There's even a case, which I found earlier when doing the research before this podcast on this book, where minor characters then got to appear in major plays. We're going to talk about Clytemnestra here as well today. And it's been turned into entertainment for the masses, right? It's been brutally and lovingly critiqued ever since it was first out. It's probably one of the world's oldest bestsellers, and I use that term very loosely, along with the Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh, probably. The Iliad and its sister book, the Odyssey, which we'll cover in another episode further down the road. I'm a little old booked out. So we covered Meditations, we covered the book of Nehemiah, now we're covering the Iliad. Don't worry, we're going to move a little bit closer to contemporary times in our next few episodes here, but we will hit on the Odyssey. But it's been assigned, right, to high school students and to college students in the Western world since time out of mind, and almost everybody's read the Iliad. Or if they haven't read the Iliad, they've at least stood next to somebody who's read the Iliad. Or they've had somebody tell them they should read the Iliad, and just like a dose of castor oil, by the way, there's a place in Greece where the word castor comes from. Just like that, they have been told that this is good for them. This is good medicine. And really fundamentally, I believe, and that's part of the reason why we're talking about this today with Derren and his background, and I'll go into that in just a second here. I think that's part of the problem. What could an ancient book, really, that began as a few fragments written down, coming out of an oral tradition, right, on a papyrus scroll, really, what could an ancient book like this really have to tell us today about leadership? After all, we are sophisticated. We are cool. We're trendy. We're hip, right? We're somebodies after the entire history of the world. We're postmodern somebodies, right? In a land of previous nobodies. I mean, we're all mini celebrities. I mean, we have social media, which may or may not be real, depending upon your perspective. We have big boy media. What the heck we need from Homer, right? With hard names and weird pronunciations and what the hell's a myrmidon, really? Like, what is that? Well, that's the point of this podcast, right? That's the point of doing this kind of literature. That's the point of reading it and examining it and talking about it with folks like my co-host today, Derren. This is the point of this type of book. This podcast is about understanding that literature, more so than business books, can help leaders to learn to lead better. And so what can we learn from this book that has straddled 2,500 years and that insists and persists and will continue to do so probably until either the world blows up, we blow up the world, or we disappear. I suspect the Iliad will be, again, one of those 3 books that will be around at the end when it's all said and done. Which brings me to the background of my co-host, Derren, here. And hopefully not just the co-host for this episode, but for many episodes in the future. I'm hoping to kind of pull him in, listeners. I want to draw him in, suck him in, hold him. It might be a little difficult. Darren's a little cagey. Derren Burrell is a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. I want to be very careful when I say that because these guys' rank means stuff. It means something, right? And being a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel means something. He smiles, and you can see him right there. He's smiling, but it means something, right? And he had 20 years of service to the United States of America, and I thank him personally for his service. He commanded 200 plus personnel at overseas locations, including fun vacation spots like Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Turkey, and Cuba. Yes, that's right, folks. We do have a location in Cuba. If you ever want to go on vacation, just sign up for 6 to 8 weeks of boot camp. You can go to sunny Cuba too. He's had experience in nation building. He's had experience in working in the political functions of government in the United States. He was handpicked to serve in the White House with President Barack Obama. And another time, I would love to find out more about that. I'm sure that had to have been a fascinating experience behind the scenes. And I'm sure there are things that you cannot tell us about. But I'm going to dig in and ask some questions and figure out what those things are. And then after that, he had a corporate background as a COO and CFO of a $1 billion fiduciary outsourcing firm. I love that word, fiduciary. And now he is a 2-time startup angel, and he's got M&A experience. And his latest project is serving as president of Veteran Venture Capital. And we will put the links to Veteran Venture Capital. We'll put the links to all Darren's background, his LinkedIn profile, his bio, everything you want. It'll be in the show notes below the episode as you listen. So you can go and click around and check him out and see what he's about. Veteran Venture Capital is dedicated to fusing resources, mentoring, and combining years of fiscal and operational experience to an investment fund and a consulting firm that strategically assists businesses with veterans in leadership. I can't think of better people to be in leadership than veterans, and I can't think of better people to be doing startups and contributing to the startup economy of America than veterans. And Derren is helping make that happen with Veteran Venture Capital. Derren, take it away. Tell us what we missed.
No, thanks again, Jesan. It was a privilege and an honor to serve this great nation in the Air Force. And again, for context, my service was as a financial manager in the Air Force. And so, while I didn't fly the planes, I did keep the bills paid and keep them in the skies, if you will. So we had a say in that air power ain't free, and that's why you need bean counters like me in the front lines in Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, like you were talking about. Had some really good spots as well. Italy and England. Spent about 7 years overseas, but each base I was stationed at, upwards of 10 moves in my 21-year career, was essentially a small town in itself, needing the same care and feeding in terms of utilities, services, law enforcement, all at the same that you can think of. So you can kind of liken my job to a CFO of one of these installations, and the wing commander that I reported to was the CEO, if you will, of a large corporation or town or something like that. In all, I've deployed about well over 30 billion in my career to ensure mission accomplishment, as they say. And as a commander, I had the honor of leading hundreds in support of various operations around the globe. And I took all of that and took it into the private sector over the past 6.5 years or so, having really applying these military leadership principles that I think we'll touch upon here. And by the way, I am glad you mentioned hard to pronounce names, so that lets me off the hook for several of the conversation that we're gonna go through. But that the principles that I learned in the military are very applicable to the private sector, to business, and I found them very rewarding, in both personally and professionally. And that's why I started Veteran Ventures Capital, to help fund veteran businesses and take them to the next level. So I guess just my focus on the power of leadership is really in how veterans can really take a company, and take what they learn in the military, the skills, the education, grit and determination, mission accomplishment type of attitude, all of what I learned about serving this country are tremendous force multipliers in the private sector. And so I'm kind of excited to show a little bit of the parallels there, and how it transcends even a document that's as old as the Iliad. So yeah, really excited, but turn it back over to you, Jesan.
Yeah. No. I'm excited as well. Look, so here's the way I think of quote unquote bean counters, right? If we don't have those people, we get in trouble. You can't deploy without knowing where your dollars are going, and it requires discipline, mental fortitude, an attitude of accountability, responsibility, deep level of engagement, and quite frankly, every bullet has a cost, and it's more than just the human cost, although that is significant. It's also the financial cost that goes behind that. War and we'll talk a little bit about this today in the context of the Iliad, because it's really interesting when you read the Iliad and you see like how people die, and particularly in the end of book 2 and getting into book 3, book 4, book 5, as they begin to kind of as the Greeks begin to logistically pull everything together. Homer describes that in incredible detail. And even back in the day, such as it were, you had to have somebody track the gold. We may be going out pillaging, but someone's got to count all that. It's got to go somewhere, and so that matters, right? And again, the fundamental principles of leadership are still evident in that. And I'm excited to sharpen my iron in the forge of Derren's wisdom and his life experiences, which again are radically different than mine, and have him challenge me and have me challenge him as we take you through this leadership journey together. So let's get started. The wrath, saying goddess of Peleus' son, Achilles, that destructive wrath which brought countless woes upon the Achaeans, and set forth to Hades many valiant souls of heroes, and made them themselves spoil for dogs and every bird. Thus the plan of Zeus came to fulfillment from the time when first they parted in strife, Atreus' son, king of men, and brilliant Achilles. Who then of the gods was it that brought these two together to contend? The son of Leto and Zeus, for he in anger against the king roused throughout the host an evil pestilence, and the people began to perish, because upon the priest Chrysis, the son of Atreus, had wrought dishonor. That is from book 1 of the Iliad. That's right at the beginning. The wrath, saying, "O goddess of Peleus' son Achilles." This is the line that everybody starts with, right? And everybody says, the Iliad is about the wrath of Achilles, but it's not really about that. It turns out that even 2,500 years ago, war resulted from ego and pestilence, emotional passion out of control, and just basic fundamental misunderstandings between people. It turns out that wars are a human failing and a human folly, right? Which should not be genuinely surprising, and yet we are still surprised by this. I think in our sophistication, we've become convinced that we're somehow past our own psychology or our own, well, dare I say, metaphysical existence, and we're really not. You know, we've chipped off a few shards from the giant cube of reality, and we call ourselves geniuses. And yet, and still, pestilence. We are recording this during a time of COVID. Pestilence can still lay us low, right, and reveal the animal that lives underneath the thin veneer of humanity and the thin veneer of civilization. And you talk about war. War is one of those other things. And so is leadership. Leadership is an incredibly human act, and this seems to be cautionary to our time and place. And it seems like, you know, maybe it's not exactly Twitter or the internet that drives our conflicts. Maybe it's not quite that. Maybe it's something else. And you get from this first part, I think, of the Iliad, this first piece here. And I want to talk a little bit more about this with you, Derren, because this is fascinating to me. You get the first part of this, which is like the gods, which, you know, we now live in a post-Christian society. So, and we're not, this is not a religious podcast, but Christianity does matter. And we will eventually read City of God. I'm working my way through that by St. Augustine. And we will eventually touch on the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas. There are 14 volumes in that set, I believe. It is a beast, but we're not going to talk about that right now. However, what I will say is this: it's interesting they bring up the gods in the Iliad right off the bat. Homer brings that up right off the bat, and I think he's substituting psychological passion for the gods. I think he's substituting that driver, right? What do you think about this? What do you think about the military's mind, right, inside of this space, right? What do you think about pestilence and ego and mistrust and distrust, and how this all kind of mixes together, Derren?
Yeah, I think you're really on to something there, Jesan. I mean, you kind of pointed it out, but I'm reminded of the military's mindset and need to focus on the mission at hand. It's too easy in the dealing with the human failing, the human folly, to be so distracted, you know, and that can really, you know, infiltrate you on the battlefield, or when you transition out in the boardroom, and really help. You know, it can thwart you from your short-term objectives that lead to those long-term goals. And so, I mean, that part where you know, the last part of what you read, and wrought dishonor, you know, by that priest. You said that crisis.
Yeah, the priest Chryses, the
Crises,
son of Atreus, had wrought dishonor. Yeah,
yeah. You know, that to me implies, you know, again, a lack of integrity. One of the core values of the Air Force is integrity first, and certainly one of the ones that I put in the core values of Veteran Ventures too. And I think that's another important point here, is striving to keep integrity at the forefront of every decision we make as leaders. And so I think that is something that really comes out in the book one, right up front, that there's a lack of that, and you know, there's nowhere to go but down after that.
In the civilian world, we don't talk too much about honor anymore, and it's been one of the things that's been surprising to me. Consistently in the course of the last probably 10 years, I've been doing formalized leadership training, and then in the last 20 years I've been just kind of looking at this in one way or another from various aspects overall. Why don't we, and the other piece is face, which we're going to talk about it here as well, because Agamemnon just straight up, you know, gets in Achilles' face. And then Achilles straight up gets in his face. And these are both men of pride. Now, we hide pride in a whole bunch of different places, right? Like we'll say, well, I'm going to show that person what I'm made of. Or do unto others before they do unto you, which seems to be our mode these days, or social media, right? We're going to clap back or gaslight or whatever, right? And I'm not going to go too far down that road. But we have all these things that don't, where we don't say the word honor, but that's what it is, right? We're trying to save face. We're trying to maintain honor. Why do you think that has, what are your thoughts, coming out of, because I have a thought about why that has maybe drained out of our culture. Why is that so? I mean, I understand why it's concentrated so much in the military, but it's got to be a tough transition for veterans when they go from an honor-driven integrity, you framed it as integrity, an integrity-driven culture to welcome to the civilian world where, yeah, okay, I shook your hand, and now I'm going to wander this way. And it doesn't seem to really, there seems to be no consequence to that. Why? Is that a struggle for veterans? Was that a struggle for you when as you were interacting with folks in the private sector? Has it been a struggle for you, inside of raising for the fund? And obviously, not gonna, I don't want you to give away secrets or anything like that. That's not what we're doing here. But just in general, was that something that you struggled with, or that other folks have struggled with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that it has been a little bit of an adjustment. When you come out of the military, you are used to a level of trust, a level of, like you said, honor or integrity that does exist. Well, come on, it is in the private sector as well. So we're finding those bits and pieces in the venues that we're at now. It's just not necessarily the first thing. There is a requirement for businesses to deliver to their shareholders, to have a profit motive, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I think you can do that and still have honor and integrity at the same time, but those two don't always happen, right? And so I think that's part of a little bit of an adjustment of the unity, cohesion that you had in the military that you don't necessarily have in the outside realm, because they don't have the same motivations. We don't make a profit in the military. Okay, I manage billions of dollars at a time in the Pentagon overseas, and even in the White House, less than that. But there wasn't a profit and loss statement. I didn't have to do that, and there was other ways to report our statistics. So yeah, coming out and adjusting to the life of really focusing on more than just mission accomplishment, but mission accomplishment with a profit motive. That is an adjustment. That is an adjustment that every service person who decides to go into business in the outside world has to struggle with, in a good way. You need to do it. You need to do it. And I think you could bring integrity and honor into that operation just like you can in any military operation. So it's there for the taking. It's just something that is a little bit more of a challenge than in the private sector, that we, when people, I've presented this fund opportunity to hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 12 months or so. And some people, were, it was a great fit for, and they said, hey, I can raise you X millions of dollars, no problem whatsoever. And I took them at their word at first. And that turned out to not always be the case. Okay. We do have people that are really interested in the theme and the focus and where we're at and trying to help those businesses scale. There are others that said that, thought it would make a pretty good byline on potentially a business opportunity that they saw elsewhere. So yeah, there's a little bit of a problem to really read people's motives. I think I've gotten much more adept at that over the last year. But yeah, I think it's something that every transitioning veteran would take a look at and say, this is definitely not the same thing as it was when I was, in the service. And again, it's not horrible, terrible, no way to deal with it. Listen, one of the things we do as veterans is we adapt and overcome. We do it on the battlefield. It's not a problem to continue to do that when we get into the boardroom. So it's just a matter of learning that it's a little bit more profit motivating than necessarily integrity motivating, and it's our job to merge those two together. And I think that is something that the business world is a yearning for. It has it in pockets. It could always use it more. And I think that's where a veteran can, again, add a lot more skills and a lot more value to a business who's looking to make a return, but an impactful return, right?
Yeah.
One that has purpose. And I think that's, again, part of what we're doing and what I've been trying to do since launching Veteran Ventures.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, it's, people, we're talking about the Iliad. I mean, come on, so people have always been, untrustworthy, right? And there is no new thing, Ecclesiastes, there is no new thing under the sun, right? The move, I think by some to dismiss what you just said as not necessarily being anything that we need in the modern world is something that is part of the reason why I started this podcast, right? It's we got to get a hold of the centralizing pillars of the Western world, I think, and we got to hold on to them because they're not guaranteed, right? And honor and integrity and engagement at multiple levels, and everybody doing their part, everybody standing up and doing the piece that they need to do, is the way forward, I think, with that. Leadership there is truly doing those things even when you don't feel like doing them or even when there does not seem to be an immediate benefit, right? Like if I'm in a room with somebody who's pitching to me an idea, the biggest leadership act that I can do in that room is to say that idea is not for me. If it's genuinely not for me. Because what I'm doing is I'm telling that person, thank you for coming by. I appreciate your time. Go away. And it's not even the go away part. It's the thank you for your time. It's the being honest. Because here's the thing. If I don't establish credibility at the beginning with whoever it is I'm talking with, then everything else doesn't matter. And again, same thing in the Iliad. I mean, friggin' Agamemnon, he established credibility as a politician, for sure. We'll see that later. He established credibility as a person who is able to move the crowd, right? A person who is able to engage with Achilles, not necessarily on his own level, but push him and manipulate him, right? Or at least try to. And then you've got this priest, which I want to talk about church and state here. and the priest is not sort of fleshed out as a, at least not in the early part of the Iliad, fleshed out as a major character, but that triumvirate of a dynamic, that triangle of a dynamic between the politician, the warrior, and the priest, that dynamic comes together in leadership. It comes together in leadership in the boardroom. It comes together in leadership, obviously, in the nation state. And I guess in the example, not even I guess, in the example you were talking about, it comes together in, or it is exemplified in, how do I preserve my credibility? That's the mystical, metaphysical part. How do I keep the person on my side? That's the political part. And then how do I make sure that I can fight and he can fight? Because in the future we may meet on the field of battle. That's the warrior part. And you got to keep the triangle together. And I think our triangles are getting broken all over the place for varying reasons. But I think our triangles are getting broken all over the place. That's just my initial thought on this. When we look at I
think it's good stuff. I think that I guess we're going to get into the brokenness of it and potentially what's the way ahead? That kind of mentality. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the way out? Right. And again, I said, we let's go back to the book. So, again, and speaking about the priest, right? So let's talk about the priest. Let's talk about that pastor class, right? Um, in the Iliad book one, back to the book, sons of Atreus and other well grieved. I love that spelling of the word, but well grieved Achaeans. To you may the gods who have homes upon Olympus grant that you sack the city of Priam and return safe to your homes. But my dear child, release to me and accept the ransom out of reverence for the son of Zeus, Apollo, who strikes from afar. Then all the rest of the Achaeans shouted assent to reverence the priest and accept the glorious ransom. Yet the thing did not please the heart of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, but he sent him away harshly and laid upon him a stern command. Let me not find you, old man, by the hollow ships, either tarrying now or coming back later, lest your staff and the wreath of the god not protect you. He just threatened to preach straight up. Her I will not set free. Sooner shall old age come upon her in our house in Argos, far from her native land, as she walks to and fro before the loom and serves my bed. More on that in a moment. But go, do not anger me, that you may return the safer. Agamemnon is thumping his chest like nobody's business. I'm sure you have seen this in your experience. People thumping their chest, talking beyond their, as my mama would say, talking beyond their raisins, getting up after it, and talking like he's not going to get smacked in the mouth. The priest asks him, just return my daughter to me. That's it. Return my daughter, and I'll make sure that the wrath of God doesn't come down on you. And much like with many modern politicians, again, we're not going to go, this is not Republican, Democrat, this is not United States, China, this is just in general, the political class. There doesn't seem to be ever a sense that, there might be something bigger than you floating around out there. And that something might want to get a hold of you. There seems to be in the political class, in the Iliad, particularly among Agamemnon, or with Agamemnon, not among Agamemnon, but with Agamemnon, there seems to be a sense that I am the measure of all things. I can do whatever I want. Isn't that just ego? Like, we see this with CEOs, too. That's just ego, right? It's like there's nothing bigger than me. Like, if you're the CEO of Google, what's bigger than Google? I mean, the U.S. government, maybe. Maybe that's the thing that you fear if you're the CEO of Google. But even then, you're like, so, Senator, we're monitoring all your clicks. You know that, right? Like, we saw those last 10 sites you went to. So, like, really, what's above Google? Like, what? Because they as it was said back in the day, they have all your base. they know where you are. They know what you're looking at on the internet. I think I read a statistic one time that the average individual, if they've been on the internet for the last 20 years, has had something like 20 million on average searches, and Google's tracked every single one of them. Think about that. For almost every single person on the planet. That's a scary amount of data. And we're just like, yeah, it's fine. Like, whatever. So, when we put it in that context, why is Agamemnon yelling at the priest, Derren? Why? And have you seen this in your experience?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier, and the proverb, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Right.
Same, like passions, or what I would call pride, ego, and selfishness, uh, still exists today as it did 2,500 years ago. And you'd think we'd learn, okay? You'd think we'd learn by now but honestly, that is part of the sinful nature of mankind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think, again, not to really focus on my time in the military, because I really enjoyed putting everything that I learned there into practice in the private sector. But we'd be better off if we abided by another core value. We talked about integrity first. Second one is service before self. What type of world, would we live in if we truly put forth the needs of those around us before ourselves, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I had great bosses in the military for the most part. And the ones that were really great stressed the need to take care of your people. You know, take
Hmm.
care of your people, they'll take care of you. And I saw that as a timeless mark of a great leader is just thinking of others, serving others, and then they would in turn take care of you. And that I firmly believe that's how I was successful in the military. And I think that that's just a again, like you were talking about, there's an incredible polarization when you just get in your face and what Agamemnon does here. It's just how many times do we see this in the news? Like I said, nothing new under the sun. 2,500 years and more, and we're still going through the same things today. It's just amazing to me that people don't take the time to read some of the great literatures of the past and try to find a way to not repeat the sins of the past.
Right, right, not right, or at least make all different ones. Let's just
Yes.
commit all different sins, or let's try to commit new ones. At least let's try to come up with some new things, right? Um, well, I mean, okay, so the role of church and state, like he's getting up in the priest's face. Um, you, and I actually use myself as an example. So, I've done work with churches and with church organizations in leadership, which is fascinating and amazing because you would think if you are a person who doesn't know anything about religion, which there are many people who don't know anything about religion, it's just not a part of their lives, but yet and still they will say they believe in a higher power, which is always interesting. But okay, you're not getting involved in a church or, a mosque or a synagogue or whatever. Okay, you go into these structures, they're institutions. They're structures. Just like you talk about the military in a broad sense, the Air Force is a structure. The Army is a structure. The Marines are a structure. The Navy is a structure. Those are structural organizations. Well, the Catholic Church is a structure. The Jewish synagogue is a structure. A Sunni Muslim mosque is a structure, right? And inside of those structures, you would think would be people who are all singing off the same Quran or singing off the same Torah or singing off the same Bible. And while the words might be the same for everybody, they're not all singing off the same book. And so you get into these leadership structures, I found in my experience, you get into these leadership structures inside of something that is considered to be so metaphysical, right? So beyond the cares of the world, right? And there are some very venal, sometimes, things going on inside of those spaces around money, around power. I'm going to say the word around sex, intimate interactions, intimate relationships. There are things going on there. And as a leadership development guy, who gets called, I'm thinking of one client that I worked with many years ago where they were trying to remove a pastor from their congregation who in essence was confronting the negative things inside of the organization and was seeking to clean them up. And so he brought me in, and then because he was like, I need help dealing with these people. And I basically reconfirmed what he was already doing because it was the right thing to do. and the people hated him, which was that he already was living with that. He was like, I'm fine with that. But then they also hated me, which was great. I love being hated. It's fine. I have a high level on my psychological profile. I have a high level of being able to deal with basically being disagreeable, high level of disagreeableness. But you get it. But then here was the other piece of the dynamic. So many of the people in the church also worked in the local government. so like if he wanted to have a ditch dug outside the church to remove wastewater, he couldn't get it done because there were people who were on one side of the project inside of the church who worked for the city and went to the church. And then there were people on the other side of the project who didn't work for the city and worked for the church, but they have control of the money. And so like you've got all these different, then you got the money dynamics and you've got the individual. It's a mess. Agamemnon just threatened a priest. He just threatened to like throw down, right? And so part of it is ego, like you were saying. But the other part of it is just like this arrangement of like who's talking to God and who's not, who's singing off the song sheet and who's not, who's hearing from God and who's not. And, you know, the Greek pantheon of gods was filled with passion and personality and drives and desires. Like you read about all these gods, they all behaved like human beings. That's the interesting thing that's often been said. The pagan Greek gods behaved like human beings, and that's how the Greeks kind of worked out the psychology of the world that they were living in, because they didn't have Freud. So you see that, and they even got involved in the fights, like in the Iliad, in book 4. It kicks in, and they all of a sudden they're jumping in, catching arrows, getting wounded. It talks about how they don't bleed, or like a human being can wound a god, basically, if a god decides to jump into a fight. But then the god will like run away, and will go get healed, and then we'll just jump right back in the fight again. And this starts happening like book 3, book 4, and kind of goes all the way through the epic. And they are influencing the direction of events. There's an idea there. There's a line there between like church and state in our era, which we've striven to kind of pull apart, and it's still kind of wound tight together. And this idea that the Greeks are working out 2,500 years ago of paying attention to being led by your passions and being attentive to who or what is doing the leading and where they're getting their motivations from, right? And I think that's one of the first big lessons from the book. So like in this podcast, usually we'll do like 1 or 2, sometimes 3 big lessons, you know, from the book that we're reading. And the first big idea, I think, from the Iliad is pay attention to how you're being led via your passions, and pay attention to who or what is doing the leading. Pay attention to your passions. Service before self is a timeless mark of a great leader. I agree, Derren. That's the thing, you know. But I don't know.
I agree. There has to be some, you know, not like you said, not to get too much into the church and state.
Yeah.
But there should be some moral compass.
Yeah, we're going to read Augustine, and when I read Augustine, oh my God, he goes off. I'm keeping my powder dry for Augustine. Because his idea was from Luke, compel them to come in. We will use the state to make people believe. And I was like, wow, all right. let's get after it. Let's get some. Let's go get after it. No, sorry, go ahead. So you don't want to get too much into the church and state. Yeah.
No, I just think that there is a set of you know, I'm not one that hammers along relative truth versus absolute truth, and I think that's something. Maybe I'll wait and certainly have some comments when we get to Augustine. So, by all means, continue on down at the Iliad.
Yeah. Yeah. Back to the book. When he had thus spoken, he sat down, and among them arose the warrior, son of Atreus, wide-ruling Agamemnon, deeply troubled. With rage, his black heart was wholly filled, and his eyes were like blazing fire. So this is when he's standing up and he's talking to his group of sort of his guiding council, right, in book 1. To Calchas, first of all, he spoke, and his look threatened evil. So he's trying to intimidate his own advisors, right? Prophet of evil, never yet have you spoken to me a pleasant thing. Ever is evil dear to your heart to prophecy, but a word of good you have never yet spoken nor brought to pass. And now among the Danaans you claim in prophecy that for this reason the God who strikes from afar brings woes upon them, that I would not accept the glorious ransom for the girl, the daughter of Chrysis, since I much prefer to keep her in my home. Now this is where you get the causa belli. This is where you get the idea of, you know, the beginnings of the idea, which are going to be planted later. You know, the face that launched 1,000 ships, right? You know, the idea of Helen of Troy, right? This idea of woman as property. And Agamemnon isn't interested in hearing about pestilence or ego or any of that. He's just like, no, you know what? You've prophesied to me wrong. And I'm going to use this. I'm going to leverage this daughter, this not this daughter, but this girl who, by the way, has no personality of her own. It's really interesting in the Iliad. And again, I'm commenting on this from the perspective of 2,500 years afterward. Uh, I'm not going to go into current events with the Taliban or Afghanistan or any of that, because I want this podcast to be a little bit timeless. And so I will say this: it is amazing how far we've come in the Western conception of female autonomy when you read something like this. She has no voice. She has no desires. She doesn't get to speak. She's just moved around like a piece of property, right? And this is reflective of also some other things that you see in the Iliad, where the troops, many of them in book 3, 4, and 5, when the battle really kicks in, and then 5 through 9, are only described in terms of how they die, and then their family background is given. So, like, you'll have, I'll actually read directly from the book, kind of going a little off script here, but you'll get to, there's the whole story of Glaucus. Yeah, book 5. Here we go. Oh yeah, Minerva. Minerva decided she was going to jump in the fight, as a god, and decided she was going to, and she got injured, and then ran back to ran back to Zeus and got was okay. Oh yeah, first Antilochus slew an armed warrior of the Trojans, Acephalus, son of Thaliacis. Talk about interesting names. Fighting in the foremost ranks. He struck at the projecting part of his helmet and drove the spear into his brow. The point of bronze pierced the bone, and darkness veiled his eyes. Headlong as a tower he fell amid the press of the fight, and as he dropped, King Elephenor, son of Chalcodon and captain of the proud Abantes, began dragging him out of the reach of the darts that were falling around him in haste to strip him of his armor. But his purpose was not for long. Agenor saw him hauling the body away and smote him in the side with his bronze-shod spear. For as he stooped, his side was left unprotected by his shield, and thus he perished. Then the fight between the Trojans and the Achaeans grew furious over his body, and they flew upon each other like wolves, man and man, crushing one upon the other. That's from the Spanish version of the Iliad, not the, and I have two different versions, not the Robert Fagel's edition of the Iliad.
That didn't sound Spanish at all.
That did not sound Spanish, no. It did not. These guys aren't given any identity, just like she's not given any identity. They're just fodder. They're just cannon fodder. And like, it's so interesting to me to see how number one, Agamemnon can't get off the road of speechifying, which leads to other problems. But also, two, he's got this daughter who he's getting mixed up in, and it's wrecking. Here he's got this girl that he's getting mixed up in. It's wrecking his life. Now I don't know what your mileage has been, Derren, but my mileage has been interesting, let's say, with passions being driven in particular directions, right? So how do you walk out principles, of not being driven by your baser passions, which we've kind of talked a lot about. But then again, how do you also, like, how do you bring in humility into this? Because Agamemnon's not behaving humbly with this person.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, and that's another one of the, I would call it timeless principles or real benefits of service in the military. Like you talked about in the beginning on the rank and the hierarchy and the structure, there's an inherent level of respect for that chain of command. Doesn't matter, doesn't matter gender, doesn't matter race, doesn't matter. I mean, there's, we like to say there was only Air Force Blue, right? And so for me, I think of a couple of things associated with this. Is that um, there's a lot less emotion. You're focusing on a mission. You get things done. But really, what the experience in the military and now in the private sector, some of the stuff we learned when we were kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Um, what I found for leaders like Agamemnon is they just talk incessantly, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
love to hear themselves speak and think that that will cause someone to generate true followership. How is that going to cause people to embrace the mission and vision of the organization if you're only talking about yourself and you only care about yourself? Like you talked about that humility, a sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself. You mentioned that earlier. I mean, that's really what I loved about serving in the military, encouraging participation from all levels of the organization. That's not necessarily um, by default in the military. A lot of times you did have people that were very stringent in the hierarchy. But I think that having people understand the mission all around, from various focal points, will lead to mission success, buy-in, incredibly more impactful than the opposite of all that, which is what we see here in Iliad. And what we see him doing is focusing on passions and problems and people individually as opposed to the collective. It's just there's an inherent goodness in humility and service and in discipline, really. And so I think those things would have served would have been hugely different outcome in both. I mean, we're going to talk about Achilles here in a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's problems in his camp too, right?
Oh yeah.
It's just incredible how people that are so strong-willed and unwilling to compromise lead to danger, disaster, and death, right?
Right, and lead other well. The psychologist who's the Canadian psychologist who's come to popularity, Jordan Peterson, has this idea of making your bed, right? Which sounds flip, but it's not, right? Basically, what he says is you can't fix the world until you make your bed. Like, fix your own backyard first, and you'll have enough to be concerned with there. Start with your own house, your own family. Um, get your things in order first, and once you have spent enough energy and time doing that, and everything's humming along and operating the way that it should be humming along and operating, then you can go out in concentric circles to your community, to your larger city, and then fundamentally to the nation state. He said the problem with most activists these days is they want to jump to the nation state level, or they want to jump to the community level, and their family's a mess. Their beds aren't made, basically. And Agamemnon's got a bed problem. And his bed problem is not that he's got multiple women coming in and out of it. He was a Greek male. They had sexual rights to everybody. That was just the culture. The problem is he's got Clytemnestra. And we were going to talk about his wife here in just a second. And he says in the Iliad, he says in Book 1 again, for certainly I prefer her to Clytemnestra, my wedded wife, since she is not inferior to her, either in form or in stature or in mind or in any handiwork. Yet even so will I give her back, if that is better. I would rather the people be safe than perish. Okay, a little bit of humility there. But provide me with a prize of honor forthwith, lest I alone of the Argives be without one, since that would not be proper. So just give me another, like, trade me one for one, right? For you all see this, that my prize goes elsewhere. How are you going to have two women in the house? Like, Agamemnon, straighten up your house, clean up your house. And later on, by the way, in oh gosh, I have a note on this for later on, which we may or may not get to. But I'll just bring it up now. In Aeschylus's Orestia, Clytemnestra actually is one of the main characters in there, and Aeschylus wrote Orestia. Oh gosh, probably 250 years after the Iliad. So I mean, it had been floating around for a while. People knew who Clytemnestra was, right? She got her own spin-off show, basically. She got her own series on Netflix, and that's actually, I think she has had a series on Netflix. And in that series, she kills Agamemnon. Like she murders him in the first act, and then is murdered herself in the second act. Can you be a good leader if your room is not made? Can you be a good leader if your house is not in order?
I mean, are you asking me?
Well, you know,
I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's very certainly folks that you and I have interacted with and dealt with and seen have tried,
mm-hmm.
right?
Oh yeah,
but I think it's I think no. I think the answer is absolutely not. There's that whole integrity thing that we've been kind of harping on a little bit. And then, I mean, again, going back to what you just read, that there's just complete abuse of authority here.
Yep.
Thinking that they're above the law. How many times have we seen that, both in the political sphere and big business, and like we even mentioned, churches?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you encourage and build up those around you. That's the goal of leadership, or it should be. And so the opposite of that part is, you know, there's usually something underlying failing leadership and abuse of authority, and thinking that, you know, that there's ways that you can get around the norm, or at least, you know, try to skirt the you know, the, I guess, the fringes of what is right and what is wrong. And so just, yeah.
Or there's this idea that somehow what is right and wrong is for people that are not you, that are down the stream from the hierarchy, right? That are further down the ladder, right? There's this idea, there's a PhD graduate student who's gained some popularity. His name is, I think, something King. I can't remember right now. I'll look it up. I'll have the link in the show notes. Anyway, he wrote an article. I just listened to an interview with him the other day. He wrote an article called luxury thoughts, or luxury ideas, basically. And what he says is that people who are of a certain socioeconomic level will say, I don't believe in monogamy. Like, they'll say this idea, right? They may even advocate for it and protest for it. But then they will lead monogamous lives. Matter of fact, they will pursue monogamy ruthlessly. And he wrote this research, and he's doing research on it now. I believe at Cambridge is where he's at now, over in England. He came out of Yale, and he came out of I think he went and served in the military as well, and he came out of a small town in California. Anyway, we'll have a link to his stuff in the show notes, because it is this part of this idea of, like, if you're and this is the other thing that's underlying what Agamemnon's saying, right? I'm of this certain class, I can do these things, but hey, you know, if you live in a hut in Greece, you got to go off and die. like the rules are for me, they're not for you. Or the rules are for you, but not for me, right? I can do what I want, right? And it goes back to this integrity thing. It also goes back to the honoring of just, like, the social structure. Just honoring the social structure. And leadership fundamentally honors the social structure. Whatever structure it's in, I believe, whether it's in a startup, whether it's in a Fortune 500 company, whether it's in a small to medium-sized business, it honors the structure that it's in, and it supports that structure. And it's really intentional. This is why I'm writing a book on intentional leadership, coming out next year. It is intentional in how it supports that structure. It's thinking about that all the time. And fundamentally, Agamemnon's not doing that here. He's not thinking about that at all. He's just hanging out, you know, demanding what's his. So now Achilles enters. Back to the book. In answer to him spoke swift-footed, brilliant Achilles, which is interesting because Achilles is framed as being full of rage and passion, not brains. So he's supposed to be a brainless, knuckle-dragging warrior, and he's not. Most glorious son of Atreus, most covetous of all. Oh, so he nailed him right there. How shall the great-hearted Achaeans give you a prize? We know nothing of a hoard of wealth in common store, so we're not going to like pull stuff out of the common. We're not cutting you a check of the $20 billion under the fund to get you out of here. Like we're just, it's not happening, right? But whatever we took by pillage from the cities has been apportioned. You already got your fair share. We talk a lot these days about fair share. You already got yours. But and it is not seemly, not a good look, to gather these things back from the army. So we're not going to take back what we already gave the guys. We gave them their stuff. But give back the girl to the god, and we Achaeans will recompense you 3- and 4-fold if ever Zeus grants us to sack the well-walled city of Troy. Now they're negotiating. This is a negotiation. Now suddenly we've gone from Agamemnon complaining, the priest wanting his daughter back, and now Achilles is like, let's do a deal. Can we do a deal here? And now Achilles seems reasonable. I have been in a room where this has happened, where seemingly what you would think would be the most unreasonable person in the world, who has a history of being unreasonable, by the way, and is the strongest guy in the world in social status, and usually is a guy, social status, hierarchy, whatever. And so he comes in and he says something reasonable in a negotiation to kind of calm down the CEO, or calm down the CFO or the COO. And both of them are being driven to be right. They're both driven in this negotiation to be right. How do you push back on unruly or unlawful leaders? How do you do that successfully in your experience, Derren? Because I will say this: when you push back on the unruly or the unlawful, they tend to not, unless you do it right? They tend to not, and I think Achilles is doing it right here. They tend to not accept that, right? They tend to be very direct, let's say, and they're high in disagreeableness, which means they're fine with being hated. It doesn't really bother them. So how do you push back on an unruly or an unlawful leader?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a delicate question. I got the impression under this instance that Achilles was doing it in front of the whole group.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And so, for me, I consider those instances to be really rare because, like you said, what we've been talking about this whole time of honor and pride and the constant tug between the two. I think there's a methodical way of addressing it, and I don't think I would have followed Achilles' example here. I believe the first step would have been to go to Agamemnon in private, confront him on his concerns, also address a well thought out course of action that would help him not only to reverse course, but also do it in a way that would bring him down, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And giving him the benefit of the doubt of doing this in private, which is really what they tell you to do as a leader, could have saved the embarrassment and that it is eventually going to come out anyway if the behavior continues. I don't think I would have done it in public because I just don't think that is very effective. It'd be a very last resort because the bridge is completely burned in this instance, right?
Right. Well, do you think Achilles was doing it in public because he just wanted to kind of be smirky? Like that's the impression.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Yeah.
He wanted to be snarky and smirky and like, yeah, okay, well, hey, we can't go back and get the stuff we already gave away, and we're not going to cut you a check. So, can we do a deal here? And it's kind of like that. It's kind of like, and then he kind of like lets it flow out, and it is a negotiation tactic. He's trying to freeze him and label him. And Agamemnon's having none of it, which we'll see in just a second. Agamemnon's having none of it because he's interpreting it in the, I think, the correct way, which is this person's coming up to question my authority, and how dare he?
Yeah.
But
I
at
think
the same, yeah,
that's just a natural reaction, just become defensive. So do it in private. They'd still
right,
come defensive, but then at that point, you come out of the room united if it's a true, sincere negotiation, as opposed to just a public display of let's see who caves first, and it's like chicken going on, right?
well, how do you avoid mutiny? Like, I know that's that's got to be. I mean, how do you avoid a mutiny at this
Yeah,
point?
and well, I can tell you in the military, you go to your boss in private, and I've done this, and said I have some concerns here. You voice them. You give him the opportunity to address them back and forth. And in the end, the decision maker is your boss. And so if he ends up changing course in accordance with what you've talked about, hey, that's great. Still is his decision to be made, and you still support it. And if he says no, we're going to continue to go this way, and may or may not give reasons why. In the end game, I work for him, and
Right.
so I would, you know, come out and express that, hey, the boss has made a decision. We're going to support it, and that's that. His decision becomes your decision.
So, in the going off script again a little bit here, but in the civilian world, since the 1960s, I would say in America, we've had a slow erosion of respect for authority.
Sure.
Okay. I don't think that I'm saying anything that's like outrageous or that you can't observe just by going out and walking around, looking around. All over, you get pushback against authority. I mean, there are things that are currently happening in the historical body politic right now that have fundamentally come out of that erosion. Um, and part of it can be framed as a I guess a sort of extension of the worship of individual liberty as a god in and of itself. Okay. But also it can be framed as, I think, the inability of people to do the skill set that you were talking about. The inability of people to take authority aside into a room and say, hey, I got concerns. Why don't more people do that? Why do you think more people don't do that? Because people would rather
I think,
undermine the authority or mutiny against it than take it aside and sort of question it.
yeah, it could be a number of reasons. I think one of them, in addition to what we talked about, uh, is they haven't been trained to,
Mm,
right? I mean,
yeah,
there's a uh, somewhat of a responsibility of today's leaders to talk about how they got to where they were in more effective ways of dealing with them and trying to generate win-win scenarios and expressing those types of uh, disagreements is certainly welcome. It's just welcome in the right manner.
right,
You follow the rules, you go and you do it the right way, and you're going to win over your boss. You're going to gain trust and you're going to gain respect, and you'll become a trusted advisor to him. That's really what the ultimate goal is, right? It's just for both of you to move forward and for the organization to be successful. So I think that's something that's gotten lost because we're just a little bit too myopically focused. It's what can you do for me right now, as opposed to keeping your eye on the broader strategic objective, as opposed to the tactical what we're doing right now. Does that make sense?
yeah. And I would push back a little bit on that. And I would say leaders have failed at providing that strategic vision.
Sure. That's
Um,
part of that communication up and down the chain that doesn't happen.
yeah, exactly. And I would think that I think that. Well, I mean, the highest example of this, at least in America, is how the president frames national policy. So, probably the last president to genuinely do this well in an era of television was the first president to do it in an era of television. That was John F. Kennedy. I mean, when he stood up at Rice University and he said, we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, the vision outlasted the president. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's stunning. I don't think if our current administration, or even our past one, and honestly, I think this problem goes back probably back 30 years. We probably began to have a drop off of this in about the last 30 years at the presidential level, which is where everybody can see it. But usually that's just reflective of the society. But anyway, the last 30 years. Can you think of any president in the last 30 years, even Pache Barack Obama, who framed a vision in a way that a dynamic country of damn near 400 million people could get behind? And your mileage varies from mine. So like maybe you have an idea of a president and that I'm missing.
I think the singular focus that Reagan had in addressing the wall,
Okay.
that the Soviet Union, tear down this wall kind of
Yep.
mentality. I think that was something that really resonated with the American populace as a whole, and
Okay.
led to really the dismantling of a decades old Cold War. I would think that would be the one that comes to mind. That they did it in a way that I think that all sides could agree upon was good for the country, was good for the world.
So how do we, because all of us aren't going to, one of the things I'll say to people is, if I'm running a small business, none of my employees care about the president of the United States from a leadership perspective.
Sure.
They care about me and how I frame the vision because I'm their example of leadership. I'm local. The president of the United States is over there, so he's an abstraction. They'll never run into him. They'll never meet him. They'll never meet anybody who's ever met him. It doesn't matter. They vote once every 4 years. If they vote at all, they don't care. A very tiny portion of them are maybe activists in my organization, but honestly, whatever. If I'm running a small, medium-sized business with 50 people, how do I do that, Derren? How do I set the vision in a strategic way that's inspiring for others? Particularly when I know that it's, well, maybe I'm not clear on the vision myself. And I'm asking this question. I'm going down this road for a particular reason. A little bit, and we're going to get back to Iliad in a second here, but I'm going down this road a little bit because it is intentional leadership. I think that that's where a lot of intentionality has to begin for leaders, is in that vision setting part. But I think a lot of leaders fail to do that. How do you do that if you're the leader of a small or medium-sized business? And let's say you have a crew of like 50 people is maybe too much. Let's say you have a crew of 5 people.
Well, the first thing you do is communicate it to them. You just got to communicate, period.
Yeah.
Right? They got to know the things that drive you, the things that are important to you as a leader, and you got to be able to communicate that to them. It's really important to continually over communicate rather than think that they've got it. And then as over time, when they understand, what it is that the organization is all about based upon cues from you, then they can actually see, and become a part of that mission and that vision that you have, that you're communicating consistently, that even if it changes, they'll see the reasons behind it. I mean, to me, it all comes down to communication. It comes down to talking it through. Even if you don't know it, you certainly know what they're doing every day and telling them how it fits into the bigger picture and why they're doing what they're doing. I think it's just, holding information up in your office, in your inbox, is of no benefit. It's better to over communicate than the opposite, right?
Is there a dichotomy though with over communication, or is it because like too much communication? Like really, how much? Because the question that one of my clients would ask you if they were sitting with you right now and you gave them that piece of advice as a consultant, they would look at you just like that, and they would say, "Okay, I'm going to tell them how bad our financials are every month. I'm going to share all of that." Because then the other extreme is open book management, right? Where you show everybody everything. And that's fraught with its own difficulties, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let me go ahead and bring another example. When I was a commander, we had weekly. We called them, all calls or commander calls. You know, I did this in the private sector, and we call them huddles.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's so it was nothing more than getting everybody together for 5-10 minutes tops. Um, either at the beginning of the week or at the end of the week, just kind of a recap of what's your senior leadership up to. And you didn't go into here's the numbers, okay, here's the stats, here's our quarterly KPIs, whatever. You didn't do all that. It was simply telling them one or two things that was in your inbox that was a big deal and how they were a part of it, right? And how they helped to get things done. Generally positive in nature, but occasionally if you had a bad episode with a commander, with a customer, with whatever, then yeah, you had a lesson learned that you could have passed along too. But the point is, you don't have an amazingly scripted out, 5-point outline, and then you go down it methodically. It was more or less just, hey, I want to hear from the boss. I want to hear from the man. Okay, ooh, what's Colonel Burrell going to say this time? And so on and so forth. It was something that was an opportunity to just maybe ask a question and maybe say, hey, what happened here? But it wasn't, when someone says, is there over communication? Have you ever experienced that? I sure haven't. I've had plenty that were kind of like, wonder what they were thinking there. That happens all the time. And sure, there may be over communication out there, but I sure haven't seen it on a wide scale. I've certainly seen the opposite of it. So that's why I would counteract that with, if you tell them the numbers, that's better than what they're getting right now.
Right. No, no, I agree. I think leaders are scared of over communication, actually. I think that's why they don't do it. Because there's vulnerability in there.
Could be.
There's a lot of vulnerability in there. Because if I'm running a small business with 5 people, and I've had this experience, so I'll speak from my own experience. I'm running a small business with 5 people. I'm responsible for all 5 of those people, so I've already got the servant leadership kind of idea down pat. I'm responsible for making sure they get paid at the end of every week. Even whether I get paid or not is an irrelevancy. They don't actually care if I get paid. Okay? And because I'm responsible for making sure they get paid, if we haven't made our sales for that week, then there's no money. And it's Wednesday, and payroll is due Friday. And none of them yet have proven to have the skill sets to be a genius enough to cover that gap between Wednesday and Friday. The only person who's proven to have the skill sets to cover that gap between Wednesday and Friday is me. And so, instead of telling them, because all they'll do is schwitz for like an hour about this and not come up with a solution because they've never showed a history of coming up with a solution, instead I'll just hold it all, be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday, and then I will magically fix it, and they will never know. And so I can either have the schwitzing episode, or I could just have them coast along, and those are my 2 options. And I think that's literally how leaders think. And as the organization gets smaller and smaller, the pressure level gets higher and higher. If you're running an enterprise organization with 50,000 employees scattered across 7 continents, you're not worried about making payroll on a Friday. You're worried about other things, but you're not worried about making payroll on a Friday. That's not you might be worried about your debt payments coming due. You might be worried about the shareholders having a problem with you. You might be worried about the government making some kind of legislation, different kind of worries, right? But 60% of people in this country are still employed by small and medium-sized businesses that have 500 or fewer employees. They are worried about, how do I make payroll on a Friday? And it is a struggle, I will say. As a leader who has struggled with this, it is a struggle to figure out how to over communicate, and where to over communicate, and how to do that successfully without losing your mind, or without having people just engage in a schwitzing session that doesn't go anywhere. Praying that they come up with ideas. And actually, my best practice was, here's a problem that we're going to over communicate about because we have to get it solved in like 2 days. I don't want to hear complaining. It doesn't matter how we got here. We all know the circumstances. Give me 5 solutions before you even show up to this meeting. And so when you show up to the meeting, you have 5 solutions that we can actually talk about and maybe get to one thing that we can do. And then we just all commit to doing that one thing and just go. That was the only solution that I had. And I still woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but then it was about can we implement on this solution? Not about these people are complaining or I'm holding all this by myself and my stress level is through the roof and my cortisol levels are messed up. I'm sucking as a leader, and by the way, all my employees are sleeping like babies because I've got it. And I don't know, was that wisdom? I don't know. Was that the right thing to do? I'll go to Father Confessor Derren. Derren, was that the right thing to do? Was that something that you would have recommended? Because that was the only solution I could think of. I didn't have any, and I think there are a lot of small business owners that are in the same predicament.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that that's what you would communicate. You know what I mean?
Right.
You have to pick what bits and pieces. Definitely when there's issues, you want to say we got some areas we're working on, and not go into extreme details. But
right.
But certainly, the folks. If you built up that level of rapport over time, I think they would be behind you. I mean, that's just my thoughts.
No, they were behind me, and in the example that I was talking about, they were behind me, and it worked out fine, and everything, crisis averted, everything was fine. I wouldn't have been able to do that without relational trust with them. That was a huge part of it, and also integrity and honor, and having followed through before. So, all right, so Agamemnon's yelling, Achilles is glaring at him. They're all hanging out in front of the crew. We're gonna skip ahead. The warrior, the politician, in a polarized environment. This idea of war, I'm kind of going to bring it to a little bit of a close here. So this idea of war, let's talk about that, because we've kind of danced around. I didn't really want to focus too much on war making, because it's real easy to go down that road. Because of your background, maybe my personal interests, it's the Iliad. It'd be really easy to go down that road of let's just talk about war for an hour or for an hour and a half. And so I wanted to kind of avoid that, a little bit. So maybe we'll hit this at the end here and kind of wrap up a little bit with this. And I don't get this idea. This is not my idea. I got this from a website called The Great Books Guy. It's actually a really great website. He's doing some interesting work there. He was talking about the Iliad, and he said, and I quote, "In a world governed by force and compulsion, war is a redemptive act." That statement right there struck me very, very deeply, because in the world that we live in today, there's a lot of talk about us moving away from the demos, right? That this idea that the mob or the masses get to vote, right? One man, one vote. And we're also moving away, interestingly enough, from the republic, where the masses elect, one representative person, and then that one representative person walks out, leadership, for a group of people. And now we're taking a large huddled mass, or sprawling mass, actually not huddled, a sprawling mass of people. We're dividing them up into smaller groups, right? And so we're having groups against groups. Now that has its own problems, as the founding fathers knew. And as we move away from both of those ideas, we move back into this idea from 2,500 years ago of individual force and state-led compulsion, because that's really the only point of the state, is to compel people, as Augustine would say. That's why he wanted to use the state, to make people believe in a Christian God, but to compel people to move towards a particular good, right, that the individual leader may think is awesome, but may not necessarily be beneficial at an individual level. I don't think in the West, in the way we're currently constructed, we're either, and by the way, we've had a half a millennia of like yelling about this. This isn't anything new, but I don't think we're at the space, physically, culturally, politically, rhetorically, to kind of deal with the erosion that we see happening all over, and I think it's going to catch us by surprise. Weirdly enough, like it's kind of like the people who build their houses on those cliffs in California, and then every year the waves come in and wash away the cliffs, and the fire comes in and burns away the cliff, and then their houses fall into the Pacific Ocean, and they're like surprised. They're like, "Oh, I had no idea the beachhead was like eroding like 3 feet every year. I had no idea why my insurance rates were so high." And then the house falls in the water, and then they're all angry nowadays on social media. Back when I remember it, on NBC News with Tom Brokaw. Okay. I think that's how we're going to be. I think if the thing tips over and falls into the Pacific Ocean, we're all going to be surprised. Like, I had no idea it was that bad. And it is the erosion of this idea of a demos, or the erosion of this idea of a republic. And when you erode that idea, then war becomes a redemptive act, because the world is then governed by force and by compulsion. Then we have a parallel idea here, which comes from Steven Pinker. He wrote a great book called Better Angels of Our Nature, where he shows with statistical evidence, and I think this is on your Goodreads list, but he shows with statistical evidence, statistical proof, that personal violence has declined over the last millennia. It just has. And we don't think about it because we think about criminals shooting each other in Chicago or wherever, major city, Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans, or we get upset and outraged when like people die, and we should, and the media reports on it and it makes it seem like it's a bigger thing than what it actually is. And he shows statistically that actually what we've done more so in the last half a millennia to millennia, we've outsourced all that violence to the state. We've said the police, the military, policy created by politicians, that'll all take care of all that. I'm not going to go get revenge on the person who rapes my daughter, because I'm going to let the state take care of that. I'm not going to go get revenge on the drunk driver who runs over my son, right? And puts him in cardiac shock or cardiac arrest and puts him in I'm not going to go do that. Instead, I'm going to let the state take care of that. And Steven Pinker shows that we've done that. So you have these two parallels, right? You have this move away from, you have this erosion of democracy and the idea of a republic, the erosion back to the individual, while at the same time the individual has outsourced this compulsion need and this violence need to the state. And we've become better and better at emotional and psychological and spiritual violence. This is where you get the ideas of psychological safety that have popped up over the last few years. In the Iliad, where they live in a world that is purely governed by force and compulsion, war seems to be the only redemptive act for them. And I think leaders have to be aware that, there's one out there that can there's an impetus, a spirit, a force that can steal and kill and destroy the soul, but leave the body, a wandering, talking, seemingly okay husk with nothing inside of it that can then be pushed by the state to do whatever it is that the state wants to have happen. Where do we go with war being a redemptive act? Because we just we just ended a 20-year engagement. We don't even call it a war. We call it an engagement. 20-year war. I'm going to use the old school word. 20-year war in Afghanistan just wrapped up. That now we have historically placed this podcast. Fine. Is war still a redemptive act?
Um, I'm not sure that I would call it that. I would call it an instrument. Okay, and we've talked. I'm sure you've studied on the instruments of national power, war being one of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So um, I think that it can be one tool at a government's disposal. Certainly not the first one. In fact, probably one of the last ones, and it seems like it was the first and only one in the Iliad, right? So we have a lot more opportunity now to not use force and compulsion, but rather seek to honor, basically a negotiation and a desire for the whole nation to move forward and even generate win-win scenarios between nations rather than, you know, force compliance right off the get-go, which still may end up happening. So I think it's not a redemptive act, as you might say. But it is a tool, I guess, in the entire tool chest that a nation can use. But I mean, kind of bringing it back down to leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a strong desire to generate those type of scenarios where there is potential winner on both sides.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we're more or less in this society an all or nothing mindset,
Yeah.
and I honestly think that's the opposite of win-win. And so, I mean, I think that there's got to be some level of sincere negotiation where both parties want both parties to succeed, as opposed to this all or nothing type of mentality that you see here in the Iliad, and
Yeah.
pretty much see in society now. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
No, that makes sense. And do you think that no, I'll frame it that way. Is there a way out of no, I'll frame it even more baldly than this and even more at a ground level than this. If I'm a leader and I want to go off and start a problem, start a fight with somebody. Say I want to pick on a bigger competitor. So I'm running your venture capital fund, and I'm going to go pick a fight with Sequoia Capital in public. I believe that's or no, not Sequoia. They're too small. Andreessen Horowitz. I'm going to go pick a fight with Mark Andreessen's fund. I know who Mark Andreessen is. I've read Ben Horowitz's book, kind of like General Patton in the great movie Patton, where he's walking around the desert yelling about Rommel. I read your book. Yeah, Horowitz, I read your book. Okay, I'm gonna go pick a fight with. I'm running Veteran Ventures. Congratulations, you've let Jesan be in control for a day. It's a mess. he's running off the rails, and now he's going to go fight with Andreessen Horowitz. Is that a redemptive act in any kind of meaningful way? No, because they're bigger, right? And they're going to crush me. It's stupid. Unless there's a strategic need to do so, or this is the only other or I can think of, and I think it's the or that you see in the Iliad. Unless I have a company, Veteran Ventures, that's full of warriors who need to go have a fight. Because what else do you do with a warrior? Otherwise, they just rot, right? Or a warrior mindset, right? And speaking of Andreessen Horowitz, I read his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And he talks about the difference. Yeah, so he talks about, okay, so you know what I'm about to say then. He talks about the difference between, a peacetime a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO, and he uses this war analogy as a person who's actually been, in those types of environments, and sees leaders and CEOs use this type of language. This has got to drive you crazy.
Now, I think it helps us resonate better with potential investors and things like that when they do use that sort of even if they mischaracterize it. Not saying that he does or doesn't, but
Sure.
So,
And I don't want to ruin
when
your
you,
opportunities to raise from folks who might use who might use that
yeah,
language. So I'm going to be very
hey, if
careful here.
Jason Horowitz wants to put a couple million in the fund, who am I to stop him?
Right.
But, but, but really, when you talked about uh, the group of, the warrior mindset, it really comes down to, I won't call it, the need at all to go to war. It's a need to accomplish the mission,
Okay.
mission execution. It's getting things done. That's where we channel that same desire that moved us in the military here in the private sector. It's ensuring that we get the mission done. It's checking the boxes. It's getting things in order. It is, finding out what is needed, sourcing the data, sourcing the opportunity, the equipment, whatever it takes. So it's still the same mindset of moving forward in the battlefield. It's just in the boardroom, and I think that's another key characteristic of what veterans bring to the table. And so, you know, the one of those areas that I think that we're going to, really, where I find that both Achilles and Agamemnon are asleep at the wheel, okay, is this importance of accountability. Okay, we that they have, misguided ideas, decisions, all kinds of different things that they're really unchecked throughout the entire discourse, right? And I think it's really important that they had a real, inner circle, because I think Agamemnon had a pretty fake one, right? I think they would be wise to run these kind of ideas and decisions and thoughts through a chosen group of confidence that would help them get different levels of feedback, potential outcomes, alternative courses of action, just really getting that different perspectives before embarking down a certain path. They just don't do that. And I think the best leaders do that. They surround themselves with a plethora of other counsel, maybe to be a sounding board, maybe to get different perspectives. Ultimately, it's still their decision, but generating that, again, when I went back to that participatory type of leadership, communication, increasing buy-in, and just understanding at various levels. I see that as another hallmark of good leadership that doesn't occur in the Iliad at all.
Yeah. Check. I have nothing to add to that. Check. Well, when we read book 2, we're going to close out here. When you read book 2, one of the lines in book 2 that I'd like to close with, for the pride of kings is great, and the hand of Jove is with them. I mean, could anything, that's it. That's it right there. I don't need counselors. I don't need the people. Y'all are expendable. And the Greek word pride actually translates into the word hubris, which means basically, the gods are going to come get you because that's the only thing that's higher than you. And you see a lot of this in leadership in our Fortune 500 companies today and Fortune 1000 companies today. And you don't have I'm going to borrow an idea from you. Wars aren't going to get won by pride, right? Like it's not going to happen. Missions aren't going to get accomplished. Yeah, exactly. Missions aren't going to get accomplished because of pride. So yeah, 3 big lessons from the Iliad. So typically we close with 3 big lessons. 3 big lessons from the Iliad that we covered today. Emotions are fine. You can have emotions. You can have pride. You can have arrogance. You can have selfishness. You can have whatever. You can have desires. That's fine. But you got to check them as a leader. You got to backstop them. You got to monitor them. You got to know yourself, right? You got to be really tied into who you are and what your triggers are, what you like, what you don't like, what you tolerate, what you won't tolerate. And you have to make that very clear, I think, to people. We saw this with Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. That was the whole point of Meditations, was to back check that. We saw this in the book of Nehemiah when we read that in our very first episode. And he checked his wires and checked his messages with the king even before getting out there and trying to build the wall. I think the second big idea that we have that comes out of the Iliad and comes out of our conversation today is that I love the quote from von Clausewitz that war is negotiation by other means. But most of the time, it's probably better to just have a heated verbal battle that will lead to a stalemate versus going to war. But if you're going to do that, as Derren was just saying, you have clear goals, specific a timetable for ending, and a clear exit strategy. It can't be an open-ended commitment. I'm not going to make an open-ended commitment to go to war with whatever the big cheese leadership development consultancy is in my space. Like it's stupid. It doesn't work. Leaders have to have a plan to get out. And then I think the third lesson that we get here comes from the Greek writer Heraclitus, who wrote close to 1,000 years later, and he said that war is the father and king of us all. Leaders must recognize that wars and conflicts, those are driven by simple, ancient, uncomplicated things like pride and jealousy and arrogance and a desire for revenge and a desire to avoid humiliation and honor. And no matter what you say about psychology these days, we know more and more about less and less than we did 2,500 years ago, I think. Leaders must acknowledge and wrestle with the desires of their own hearts first, before they can understand and plumb the depths of the hearts of other people that they are leading. And leaders must believe that those ancient impulses, which is why reading literature is better than reading business books, by the way. They must understand that those ancient desires are inside of their own hearts as well. So that's it for me. We kind of skipped over the dream part. There's a great thing in the first book where Agamemnon has a dream, and there's some religious and mystical significance to that. We did not cover that. We also did not cover the remake. I mean, we barely got out of book one. This was all about book one, basically, at this point. But this sets up everything else that happened. So you could listen to this podcast and then go read books 2 through whatever it is of the Iliad. And now you have an understanding of what the heck you're reading. And there are some great things in there. I mean, there's the death of Hector, where Achilles finally is like, yeah, I'm going to go fight. And not because, by the way, of anything Agamemnon said, because he was visited by the ghost of his dead lover, Patroclus, and, goes and, says, okay, I'll put down, my chips. I'll be part of your world. And he goes and kills Hector of Troy, which was Troy's great hero, and drags his body around the walls of Troy, hooked to his chariot. Or you could just go watch the movie version. I think Brad Pitt did this to Eric Bana in that movie. You can go watch the movie version. But spoiler alert: Hector doesn't make it. I know it's been late. I mean, if you haven't heard, he doesn't quite crack the code. But there's a ton of stuff in the Iliad. I would encourage you as a leader to go out and get it and read it, pull it apart, figure out what is living inside of there, and to do that to stay on the path of leadership with honor and integrity, and to not be driven by pride or arrogance. Derren, what have you got for us today? What would you like to promote today on the podcast?
Yeah, I tell you what, Jesan, it's been a great experience. Appreciate you letting me join in on the fun. It's excited about what you're doing and furthering the cause of leadership through some of the timeless classics. So, and hey, I'm excited about what we're building here at Veteran Ventures. We believe that battle-tested leadership drives performance and return. And again, capitalizing Veteran Fund One, it's a growth equity fund that invests in veteran-owned businesses. And if you're interested in joining the fund and obtaining a return you can be proud of, head on over to veteranventures.us or just contact me. I'm sure you'll have all that in the show notes. But again, it's the things that we talked about here. It's important to know that leadership does drive performance. I think that's what we're doing in both of our avenues here. So again, thanks a lot, Jesan. Appreciate the time today.
Absolutely, Derren. I look forward to having you back on future episodes and getting you back in here and getting your insights. For us, if you want to get more of what we're doing here on this podcast. And if you want to get it in a way that matches your small, medium-sized business, please reach out to HSCT Publishing, home of Human Services Consulting and Training, parent company of Human Services Consulting and Training, a parent company of Leading Keys, the all-in-one platform for leadership in the long-term care space. You can check us out at leadingkeys.com and hsconsultingandtraining.com. We offer remote and live training services. We offer on-demand webinars. And we also offer coaching and consulting work. We work with organizations, again, in that small and medium-sized business space, because we know that when 60% of the population works for a manager or a leader or a supervisor who is in that space, that's the example of leadership that they see. And those are the examples that we are seeking to develop in this country today, because they form the backbone of our nation. You can also check out my books. Got a couple books floating around out there. The latest book, My Boss Doesn't Care. You can go ahead and check that out. 100 essays on disrupting your workplace by disrupting your boss. Yes, I did just say that after we just talked about mutiny and going and talking to your boss. Sometimes, though, you need to get your mindset right on this. And this book is about mindset. If you have never had the courage to go and talk to your boss, if you've never actually understood in a meaningful way what is the heck is going on in the world today and how it's resonating in your workplace, you need to go get a copy of My Boss Doesn't Care. You can get that on Amazon or any other bookstore. You can also head to my website, JesanSorrells.com, and pick up a copy of it. If you would like to book me for an event, if you'd like to book me to come and speak, if you would like to just have me stand around in front of your organization and talk like this, you can go check me out and book me through JesanSorrells.com as well. Finally, got an upcoming book. I want to close with this. So people have been hassling me about writing a leadership book for many years, and I am finally putting down the 12 rules. Finally writing down the 12 rules that I think every leader should know. The 12 areas I believe that every leader should be effective in and be intentional in order to build the kinds of organizations, the kinds of institutions, and the kinds of systems that we can be proud of. And to, quite frankly, do your part to create a brick that we can put into the city of God and preserve Western civilization. If you want to check out that book, well, I have a pre-order list going, so please email me, JesanSorrells@gmail.com, or you can go and check out my website, JesanSorrells.com, or the HSCT publishing website for more information about the book. And we are creating our pre-order list right now. So go ahead and message me. 12 Rules for Leaders, a foundation for intentional leadership. Coming out April 2022. And you'll be hearing much more about that on this podcast. I'll be talking with Derren much more about that. And of course, weaving in insights from our literature into that book. All right. That's it. I'm out.